This week for our Misty Morning Sew-Along, we're going to be making block number 9. We're using fabric F, which is yellow in our diagram. So I have double-checked my diagram to make sure that the yellow square corresponds with this fabric, which is a small floral print for my quilt. So now that I know that I have the right fabric, I'm ready to cut. For block number 9, we're going to be making 12 blocks. You're going to need to cut 2 strips, 2.5 by the width of fabric, and from those strips cut 36 squares, 2.5 inches. Now, as we discussed last week, you're not going to be able to cut all 36 squares from those 2 strips. So you're going to need to cut probably 4 additional 2.5-inch squares from leftover fabric. So let's cut the fabric for our half square triangles, and then you can go back with the extra fabric and cut those additional squares. Now it also says you're going to need 1 strip 6.5 by 36 inches if you're using the triangles on a roll paper. That's what I'm using for my half square triangles, but I've also given the option of doing, it says, or 2 strips 6.5 by 18. When you use the triangles on a roll paper, having a really long strip, like 36 inches long, makes it very difficult to clip it or pin it and keep everything exactly flat. So I prefer to work in smaller sections. So I would take the option of 2 strips 6.5 by 18 inches. You'll need that piece of fabric from both the fabric F and the background. Put them right sides together, and then your paper goes on top. Now, in order to do that, I would have waste 1 square here. That's my personal preference. You can cut strictly on the line if you would like, but I find I'm more accurate if I just waste a piece in between there. So we need a total of 48 half square triangles for this block. So I'm going to be, that would make 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and I have 2 rows. So 12 and 12 is 24. So I would be cutting my paper right around here. I would waste this section right here and then cut another identical set so that I could make my 48 half square triangles that we'll need for this block. Now, when you put your blocks together, you're going to be pressing your seams in one direction. So you can make sure that your light fabric is on the top, your dark fabric is on the bottom, and then you can press your half square triangles without having to remove the paper first. Now from your background fabric, you'll need those 2 strips that are 6.5 by 18 to make your half square triangles, but you're also going to need 2 strips 2.5 by the width of fabric for your background squares. Now 2 strips would be enough to be able to cut those background squares, but I suggest you go back and take a look at your scraps and see what you have left over from previous blocks, and then cut it for squares that you'll need. You'll need a total of 24, so if you can cut a few from your other leftover fabrics, just keep track of what you're cutting before you continue to cut into strips. Now we're going to assemble the block the same way we've been assembling the others, rows together, and rows together, and then for this particular block, these are going to be pressed in. So we're pressing these in, those out, these in. And then when you put it together, they will all be pressed in instead of out. So now when you finish your block, it's going to look like this. Your block's going to measure 6.5 inches. From raw edge to raw edge. They will be 6 inches in our quilt, and you're going to be making 12 identical blocks this week.